Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a genuinely fascinating study by anthropologist Suman Nath. He took a really close look at the rapidly expanding, high-tech landscape of Newtown Rajarhat over in West Bengal, India. You know, over the last couple of decades, post-liberalized economic realities in India have sparked the sudden growth of what we call built-in cities. These are massive urban areas constructed essentially from scratch by private developers, usually centered around major IT hubs. And Newtown Rajarhat, it's a prime example of this whole phenomenon. It's quite literally a city mapped right over agricultural lands, wetlands, and small villages, transforming practically overnight into a bustling hub of startups and high-rises. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how a city like this actually forms its identity, relying on some really incredible visual evidence presented in Nath's research. So that brings us to a pretty fundamental question. How exactly does a brand new city get its soul? I mean, think about it. It's easy enough to build roads, erect massive glass buildings, lay down miles of fiber optic cables. But an urban identity, a real sense of place, history, and belonging? You can't just pour that like concrete. When thousands of hectares of land are acquired, displacing the original inhabitants to make way for a futuristic metropolis, the space enters this really complex tug-of-war. The new city has to somehow manufacture an identity, but at the same time, it's wrestling with the legacy, the memories, and, literally, the physical presence of the people who originally lived there. To understand how Newtown Rajarhat navigated this whole thing, we first need to look at a key academic concept.
And that concept is liminality. The term actually traces back to anthropologists like Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner. They used it to describe a threshold. Basically, a transitional, in-between state during a rite of passage, where, well, you're no longer what you were, but you're not quite what you will be yet. Later on, sociologists like Sharon Zukin brought this idea into urban studies, defining liminal spaces in modern society as a sort of no-man's land. It's this uncomfortable, ambiguous phase where a landscape of power is gradually displacing the local vernacular. And as we'll see, built-in tech cities spend a really long time trapped in this liminal phase, just oscillating back and forth between their rural past and their metropolitan future.
Section 1. Visual Ethnography. Images as instruments of control.
To really capture this transition, Suman Nath uses a method called visual ethnography. He shows us how urban imagery actually acts as a direct instrument of control. The core idea here is captured perfectly in a quote inspired by his study. The formation of specific landscapes gives identity to the city and erases the past through the exercise of physical power. In a built-in city, architecture and carefully designed public spaces aren't just pretty, they are socially constructed realities. By creating these state-of-the-art parks, colossal gates, and wide avenues, the city is actively overriding the history of that space. The developers and authorities are generating a powerful new visual gaze. By literally building over the old landscape, they enforce a new reality, making the previous existence of the space almost invisible to the new tech workers and residents moving in.
And this comparison brilliantly illustrates that exact concept of physical erasure. On the left, we're looking at an old photograph of Dupir Bill. This was a massive wetland where local communities, like the Gorni village, traditionally fished for their livelihoods. Now look at the right. That is the exact same space today. It's been radically transformed into the Eco Park, which is actually the largest urban park in India. That entire 100-acre water body was totally re-engineered. The central island was turned into a posh eatery with cottages, and a huge iron mesh fence was installed, completely blocking the original villagers from accessing it. There's absolutely no mention of Dupir Bill on the new maps. The landscape has been entirely overwritten, legally and physically transforming from a traditional commons right into an exclusive, ticketed tourist destination.
Moving on to Section 2, the phase of uncertainty, clinging to Kolkata's nostalgia. You see, before Newtown could confidently claim its shiny new identity, it had to navigate a highly anxious phase of uncertainty. And this lasted up until roughly 2019. During its early development, after acquiring an astonishing 7,000 hectares of land, it still really lacked a confident, independent character. I mean, it was essentially one enormous, sprawling construction site. So to compensate for this void, the city relied heavily on the adjacent metropolis of Kolkata. Newtown's residents commuted back to the old city for markets and entertainment. But more importantly, the planners and private developers attempted to borrow Kolkata's rich historical nostalgia. They basically copy-pasted iconic symbols from the old city into the new one to give it a false sense of established history, way before it eventually moved into its true identity phase, where it finally built its own standalone markers.
Just look at this. It's a miniature replica of Kolkata's legendary Rabindra Setu, better known as the Howrah Bridge, installed right outside the central shopping mall in Newtown. This is the absolute perfect physical manifestation of urban liminality. And it wasn't just this. You saw similar imitations popping up, like the Newtown Coffee House, which was built to mimic the historic College Street Coffee House. The developers were literally superimposing the image of the historic parent city onto this blank slate. It was an attempt to anchor a new, uncertain space to Kolkata's historic soul. They were trying to evoke a sentiment of romance and familiarity just to make that somewhat sterile new environment feel a bit more like home.
Section 3. Forging a new identity. Becoming a city in itself.
But hey, a city cannot survive on borrowed nostalgia forever. Post-2019, the narrative completely shifts, and this structure we're looking at was the crucial turning point. Inaugurated in 2019, the Biswa Bangla Gate is this massive architectural monument featuring a 360-degree circular hanging restaurant. Now, while it was initially conceived by politicians as a gateway to Kolkata, it very quickly evolved into the primary exclusive logo for Newtown itself. Real estate developers started using its silhouette in their advertisements. It was replicated on smart street signs all over the place. By erecting unique monumental symbols like this, along with community Durga Puja festivals and massive pedestrian plazas, Newtown successfully separated itself from Kolkata. It was no longer just the fringe or some satellite town, it had officially become a coveted, standalone city.
Section 4. The hidden reality, ongoing spatial conflicts.
Now, pulling back the curtain on this shiny new identity reveals a deeply complex hidden reality. While Newtown projects these pristine tech parks, its everyday functioning actually relies heavily on informal workers. Take this shopkeeper sitting next to his recently bulldozed makeshift shop, for example. The city has a highly ambivalent relationship with informal workers. These shanty shops provide cheap food and tea to the tech employees and construction workers, making them absolutely essential to the city's economic engine. Yet, the city authorities routinely conduct cleanup drives to sanitize the footpaths, evicting the very hawkers the city relies on to feed its workforce. It's just a continuous, ongoing cycle of eviction and return. Okay, let's dive into this specific statistic because it is truly eye-opening. Who exactly are these hawkers facing constant eviction? Well, Suman Nath surveyed 167 hawkers across major Newtown commercial zones. An overwhelming 88.62%, nearly 89% of them, were actually displaced villagers from the immediate adjacent areas. These are folks from places like Jachagachi, Guni, and Akonda Kishari, who literally had to sell their farmlands to the development authorities years ago. They witnessed the rapid transformation of their homes into a built-in city, and now they return to the exact same geographical coordinates to survive on the margins. They're literally selling tea and vegetables on the footpaths built directly over their former fields. And you know, this dynamic extends right into the construction sector as well. When we compare the daily wages between migrant workers and local workers in Newtown, the data imparts a really fascinating reality. Local workers consistently earn significantly more than migrant laborers for the exact same jobs. Why is that? Well, it comes down to deep-rooted political and syndicate affiliations. Local workers are connected to ruling political party syndicates. Real estate developers are essentially required to hire them at premium rates just to ensure their projects finish smoothly. Meanwhile, migrant workers, who are usually brought in by contractors, lack this local leverage and are paid far less. It really highlights this invisible, deeply stratified political economy operating right behind the city's glamorous facade. The socioeconomic reality constantly bleeds into the physical landscape too, resulting in these moments of brilliant visual juxtaposition. Look at the background here. You have these smooth, modern, monochromatic urban lawns designed purely for visual aesthetic appeal at a major arterial crossing. But in the foreground, cattle casually grazing on them. As the city expanded, it swallowed up traditional farmlands and grazing grounds. So in a profound reversal, the displaced rural population simply repurposed the new modern lawns as functional grazing grounds for their livestock. It is a daily, living display of liminality. The rural past is just refusing to be completely erased by the urban present. And we see this kind of reclamation everywhere. You'll find local children and teenagers from nearby villages playing a messy, splashing football match right in the middle of the highly beautified Newtown Square. Now for the developers, this is an organized space meant for structured fairs and formal urban leisure. But for the locals, any open field with a degree of flatness is, by custom, a playground. They constantly intrude upon and reclaim these manicured, empty public spaces for their everyday use. Through these daily actions, they refuse to let the city entirely formalize its identity, keeping the space wonderfully porous and contested.
Of course, eventually the authorities pushed back. In mid-2022, the Newtown Development Authority actually started fencing off these public grounds.
They installed notices requiring residents to formally register to use the parks. But the resistance was visceral. As you can see, this official notice board has been completely defaced with handwritten protests and permanent marker. One scrawl translates to, "This is not the authorities' father's ground." Another simply says, "This is public property." This is a direct, on-the-ground rebellion against cartographic control. The marginalized locals are asserting, loudly and clearly, that public spaces cannot be entirely cordoned off and sterilized for the elite.
Which brings us to the ultimate, provocative thought that Suman Nath's study leaves us with. As built-in cities continue to rapidly expand across the globe, who ultimately has the right to claim the city's spaces? Is it the authorities who design it, the tech workers who buy into it, or the displaced locals who continually navigate its margins and reclaim its lawns and footpaths? Newtown Rajarhat shows us that urban identity isn't just a gate or a park, it's an ongoing, unresolved oscillation between certainty and liminality. And the tension between the people who build the city and the people the city was built upon, well, that is the true beating heart of the modern built-in city.